studios in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
Recep Erdoğan is the Prime Minister of Turkey, a secular democratic state with a predominantly Muslim population. For the past 3 years, he has led Turkey through a series of reforms. On October 3rd, the country will begin its European Union membership talks. Yesterday, we talked with the Prime Minister about all of these issues at the Turkish mission here in New York, where he is attending the UN conference. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The London Times said of you, a devout Muslim, the leader of a strongly secular state, a pro-European with a nation rooted in Asia Minor. He finds himself squarely in the center of today's most pressing issues, the war on terror, the future shape of Europe, and the fate of Iraq. I want to talk about all of those issues while you're here in New York at the United Nations. Tell me what role you think Turkey can play in shaping the world that we live in today.
Şunu çok açık, net, rahatlıkla söyleyebilirim.
Let me very clearly say
Türkiye,
first off that,
bildiğiniz gibi,
as you
İslam
know,
kültürüyle
Turkey
demokrasi
has been
kültürünü
able to
bir arada
bring together
tutabilen,
the Islamic
bunu,
culture and the democratic culture.
birleştirebilen bir ülke.
Turkey has been able to integrate
Ve
the two
tabii
cultures.
teröre biz gerçekten çok ağır faturalar
And
ödeyerek
our country has
bugünlere
paid
geldik.
heavy prices in
Ve
face of terrorism in the past.
yaklaşık 40 bine yakın
More than
insanımız
40,000
teröre kurban
Turkish
gitti.
people lost their lives
İşin
in
maddi
terrorism.
boyutunu söylemiyorum.
I'm not even mentioning the
O
financial
şu ana
aspect
kadar
of this.
olan rakamlarla
The
100 milyar
figures
dolarları aştı.
could even be
Ve
in the
hala
hundreds
da
of
terörle
billions.
olan bu mücadelemiz
And our
sürüp gidiyor.
fight against terrorism continues
Tabii ki
as an
bizim
important part
özellikle
of our strategy.
dünyada son
And
zamanlarda gelişmekte olan, ki bunu çok açık burada ifade etmek durumundayım.
let me say that very recently
Gerek
we
11
see
Eylül'deki
that in the world there
New
have been
York'ta malum
changes.
terör
As you
eylemi,
know, there were
ardından
terrorist attacks in New York
İstanbul'daki
on September
terör
11th.
eylemi,
Then there were terrorist attacks in Istanbul, in Madrid, in Sharm el-Sheikh.
bütün bunlara baktığımız
When we look at all of these terrorist attacks, we see the situation where there is some radical religious terrorism. But to characterize this as Islamic terrorism is, I think,
bir Müslüman olarak ben yanlış
wrong. As a Muslim, I find this characterization very wrong.
tespit etmemiz lazım.
What I say is that we first have to understand the following.
Bir defa
No
insanın öldürülmesine,
monotheistic
insanların
religion
öldürülmesine müsaade etmek.
permits the killing of people.
Ki İslam kelime
And
anlamı
Islam, the word Islam,
barıştır.
means peace. That is what the word Islam means. Islam is a religion of love. And killing a person in Islam is like killing all of humanity. And so this is the understanding of Islam as a religion. And when people who say they are Muslim engage in terrorist acts, one cannot say that they do this in the name of Islam, because Islam isn't that. We don't believe in such acts.
Bu
And
tür bir yaklaşımla bakamayız.
this is not how we
Bu
can
bir
view them.
terör eylemi
So
olur.
these could be some
bu terör eyleminde
radical
olanları da
religious
düzeltemeyiz.
terrorist attacks, and we
Bunlara
condemn those
olumlu
attacks.
bakmamız da
It is
mümkün
impossible
değil.
for us to view those acts as positive.
And it is the responsibility of Islamic leaders throughout the world to speak out loudly against such terrorism carried out by fundamentalists who claim they do so in the name of Islam.
Bu sadece siyasi liderlerin değil.
Of course, this is not something that the political leaders would only speak about. I think it is also the scientists of countries, Muslim countries, they must also make joint statements. For example, 1 week ago, there was a meeting of the religious leaders of the Eurasian countries. And in that meeting, I was there. I delivered the inaugural speech, and in my speech there too, I also mentioned this point. I said, in the Islamic world, in the Eurasian geography, all the religious leaders, the scientists, must come together, and they must define terrorism
bizim dinimizde
And they must make clear the meaning of killing people in our religion. And I said that it's very important that the religious leaders, the scientists, work together in a common platform against terrorism. And I said this was important because otherwise people would equate terrorism with Islam, and nobody has a right to do that. We as the political leaders must do our share, and the scientists and the Muslim intellectuals must also do their share. And this was what was mentioned in the communique that came out of that meeting.
Let me turn to Turkey, as it is sometimes called a model of secular democracy for a Muslim nation. Do you see it as a model?
Şu anda bizim ülkemizin tabii bu yönü
Of course, this character of our country is developing every day. In other words, the Islamic culture and democratic culture coexist, and Turkey has a very serious democratic culture now. I think that in many ways, according to my opinion and according to my experience, I can say that we have exceeded the experience of some of the European countries, and I think that we will move even further. Of course, that doesn't mean to say we don't have any shortcomings. We do. For example, I make some statements about the Copenhagen political criteria, and I speak of the reasons why we worked day and night to pass reforms. We did all that because we wanted to improve the quality of life of our people. Of course, some people have, or some countries have suggested that Turkey could become a model or an example. Our objective was not to become a model or an example. This is not our primary objective. We do what we have to do. And once we do what we have to do, other countries that have a Muslim population might look at Turkey and see how Turkey has progressed, and they may wish to implement some of the things that we've implemented, and they may talk to us, etc. This is possible, of course, and I think that everything good that happens has to be for everybody, and this is our understanding. And it is with this understanding that we always speak of our experiences with all of our friendly countries. And we also speak about these experiences with countries that do not share the same faith with us. We are very friendly with many countries. And as you may know, with Spain, Turkey is co-sponsoring the Alliance of Civilizations under the auspices of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Annan. Why do we embark on an alliance of civilizations? Because we do not want a clash, but we want an alliance of civilizations. And for this to happen, two leaders are working hand in hand. And we will work very seriously. And our hope and wish is that the almost 18 Mediterranean countries will be a part of this effort. And so this alliance of civilizations and the result of the work carried out in the alliance of civilizations will be very positively received. And what we are trying to achieve here is diversity in a plural sense, and I think that this will be very positive if we can achieve it. This is plurality in diversity and diversity in plurality, so this is very important, and I think this would be a very embracing understanding.
Where are the tensions in a secular democracy in a Muslim nation? Where does it become difficult?
Burada aslında zorluklar zihniyet değişiminde başlıyor.
I think the difficulties start with the change of mentality. As you know, it's not easy to change mentality. We have traditions, we have habits. It's not easy to change them overnight. In our country, too, there are some people who resist these developments, but they are marginalized. And it is, of course, possible in any society. If you look at the American society, if you look at other Western societies, you will always see points of resistance. And I think that we should not feel uncomfortable with these points of resistance. I think we have to look at these points of resistance to see how best we can overcome them through education, through other ways of explaining what we do. And in this way, I think we can minimize the resistance. And we don't feel very uncomfortable about such points of difficulty, as you put it. And Turkey has taken or covered great distance and will continue to cover great distance. What is important here is the following. Of course, secularism
Hani bakıyorsunuz
is
Anglo-Sakson laiklikte bir
implemented in
farklılık
different
var.
ways. For example,
Ama
Anglo-Saxon
Batı tipi Avrupa
secularism
ülkelerindeki
has its
İngiltere'yi bir
own
kenara koyacak
differences.
olursak,
But
diğer
if we set
ülkelerde
aside
farklı bir laiklik
the UK,
uygulaması var.
we see in continental
Türkiye'de bu
Europe a
noktada
different
farklı bir
implementation
laiklik
of
uygulaması yapılıyor.
secularism, and Turkey
Şimdi
has
burada
its own
bizim
kind of
Türkiye
implementation.
Cumhuriyeti'nin
And we, as Turkey, as a
1982
Turkish Republic,
Anayasası'nın gerekçesinde bir laiklik tanımı var.
we have in our
Oradaki laiklik
1982
tanımında
Constitution
devlet
the principle
bütün
of
dinlere eşit
secularity.
mesafe ediyor.
And in
Ve
that principle,
devlet
the state
vatandaşlarının
is equidistant
dini
from all faiths
inançlarının
and religions,
gereğini
and the
yerine
state
getirmede laikliği bir güvence olarak görür.
sees secularism as an
Bizdeki anlayış
assurance in
Şimdi
which
biz bunu
people can
oturttuğumuz
fulfill
anda
their
ben
religious
inanıyorum ki halkımızın
obligations.
laikliğe bakışı çok daha
and I
olumlu
think that
olacaktır, çok
if
daha
we
başarılı
view
olacaktır.
secularism like this, our people will succeed better in this.
As you know, they say that you are too Islamic for the secularist and too secular for the Islamist.
Şimdi ben her şeyden önce şunu söyleyeyim.
Well, let me say the
Bir
following.
defa kişi, birey laik olmaz.
The individual is not secular. It is the state that is secular. I am a Muslim. As an individual, I am not secular, but I believe in secularism in the affairs of the state. And I think that we need to be able to separate the two from one another. Sometimes similar mistakes are made in Turkey.
Laik olarak gördüğünüz anda
The
o
moment
zaman
you see the
şu soru
individual
hemen
as
önünüze gelir.
secular, as being
Laiklik
secular,
yoksa bir din
then
midir?
the question is
Laiklik
secularism
bir
a
din
religion?
değildir.
But secularism is
Laiklik
not
bir
a
yönetim
religion.
anlayışı.
It is a
Bunu
way
birbirinden ayırmamız lazım.
states are run, and
Dolayısıyla
this is what we have to
dinle laikliği
separate from one
karşılara
another.
çıkardığımız
So
anda çok ciddi bir
when
yanlış
you
yapar.
if you compare religion
zaman
and
bir
secularism,
felaketin de
that would be
habercisi
a mistake,
İşte
and
biz
that
bunu
would be the
ayırıyoruz.
forebearer
Bizim
of
başarımız
a disaster. And this is what
Dolayısıyla
we've actually
ben
been able to
Müslüman
distinguish
birey
from one
olarak
another. So I,
ama
as an individual,
yönetim
am Muslim,
noktasında da
but as
laikliği
when it comes to
savunan
the affairs of the
ve
state, I believe and defend the
titizlikle
principle of
savunan
secularism
bir insandır.
with care.
What role does the religion, the Muslim religion, play in the affairs of the state of Turkey? What role, what impact, what difference does it make that Turkey's predominant religion is Islam?
Biliyorsunuz klasik tanıma baktığımız zaman
If we look at the classical
laiklik tabii devletle
definition,
din işlerini
of course,
birbirinden
secularism
ayırt
is
ediyor.
a separation of
dünyada
affairs of the
hala
state
tam
and religion.
manasıyla başarılamadı.
Of course, this has not been so successfully
şu veya
achieved
bu
anywhere in the
oranda
world
bakıyorsunuz,
today.
Right.
If you
bazı yerlerde din devlete, bazı yerlerde
look
devlet
in
dine
different parts of the
karışıyor.
world, we see
Bunun örneklerini
a
vermek
religion
çok.
become part of
Çok
the affairs of the
fazlasıyla
state. There are many
var.
examples that
Yani
one
batıda
can
da bunu görebiliriz.
enumerate here, and we
Hatta
see
şu anda
examples of this
Amerika'dayız,
in the West.
Amerika'da da görürüz.
And we're in the
Yani
US
öyle,
right now. There may be
durumlar
examples
oluyor
in
ki
the
mesela
US too.
Türkiye'de
For
bizim
example,
çok garipsenen bir eylemimiz siyasetçi
something
açısından
that is seen as being very strange in Turkey in the
yapılan
political
bu
sphere
noktada
may
bir
be found to be very
siyasetçinin
ordinary
eylemi
in the
veya
West,
hareketi
or vice versa,
Türkiye'de de
something that
garipsenebiliyor.
is
Yani bunun
done
çok
in the
örnekleri
West
var.
may be found to be
Bunları
very different
örneklendirmem de mümkün.
in our perception in
Fakat
Turkey,
bunlara
and
girmeyi
I don't want to go
gereksiz.
into the examples of this now.
Dolayısıyla bunları da zaman içerisinde
But I think
aşmakta
over time
fayda var.
we
Ve
must
laikliği
overcome
de
these differences,
tabii bilim adamları
and secularism,
acaba ortak bir tanıma kavuşturabilirler mi?
whether secularism can
Yani
have a
burada
common
bir
definition is of
politik
course very important.
uluslararası
Whether a
zeminde
collective wisdom
gerekir.
may emerge in the
Ama tabii
international
böyle bir
platform to
şey de
define secularism.
bilimde maalesef
And unfortunately,
çok
of
zor.
course, it's quite
Ve
difficult
bunu
in science to
aşmak,
achieve that.
inanıyorum
And
ki çok büyük faydalar.
if, however,
getirir.
we were able to establish a definition
şimdi
that would
Türkiye'de eğer dersek,
solve some of the
dinle
difficulties.
devlet birbirinden tamamen
Today,
ayrılır.
if we say
Hayır,
that the
yani
affairs of the
tamamen
state and
ayrılmış
religion are
değil.
completely separate, we cannot
Örneğin
really
bizim
say
Diyanet
this
camiamız.
because, for example, we have
Ve
the Directorate
Diyanet'in
of Religious
devletle şu
Affairs,
anda,
and the
bağlantısı
Directorate of
var,
Religious
ilintisi
Affairs is
var.
a part of the state
Aynı
mechanism.
şekilde geliyoruz Batı ülkelerine
In the same
bakıyoruz.
way,
Batı
if you look at
ülkelerinde
Western countries,
yine
in the Western
bakıyorsunuz
countries,
ki din adamlarıyla
you see
siyaset birbirinden
leaders
öyle dört dörtlük kopuk
not so
hele
separate
seçim
from
zamanlarında
the political sphere. For
ilişkilerinin
example,
çok çok
in
önemli
times of
boyuta
elections,
kavuştuğunu
we sometimes see that those
Bir
relationships become
mesela
very
Batı'da,
important.
örnek olarak
To give
bazı
you an
ülkeleri
example,
vermek gerekir ama ben bu
Perhaps
programda
one can
bu
give some
isimleri
examples.
vermekten
I don't
herhalde çok daha
want
isabetli.
to go into any names, but
Bunları sizler zaten hemen
I am
kendileri
sure that you
biliyorsunuz.
probably know of all of them as much as I do.
When you look at your application for membership in the European Union,
Birliğine üyelik sürecinde.
is it religion that makes the rest of Europe nervous? Is it the fact that Turkey is a Muslim country that makes France and Germany nervous?
Şimdi bunu geneli için söylersek yanlış olur.
If we generalize this
Ama ben
observation, I think this
bazen
would be
tabii
wrong.
öyle tablolarla karşılaşıyorum
But
ki
sometimes
sizlerin bu
I am
sorudaki
faced with
endişeyi ben
situations
taşıyorum.
where I share the concern which you voiced in your question,
Bakıyorum ki olacak gibi değil.
because I
Biz her
see
şeyi
that
yapmamıza rağmen
despite everything that
niçin
we've done,
önümüze hala bazı engeller
there are still some
getiriliyor diye
obstacles
doğrusu
which we are
kendi kendime
faced with, and
soruyorum.
sometimes I ask this
Bakıyorum,
question to myself as to
yani
why
bizim
this is
Müslüman
happening.
olmaktan başka bu
And the
noktada
answer,
önümüze
I
getirecekleri
find
bir
no
engel
answer
yok.
other
Öyle
than
bakıyorum.
the fact that we are a
Ha,
Muslim
burada
nation.
daha çok sosyal demokratlar değil,
It's not the
Hristiyan
Social Democrats so
demokratların
much, but
içerisinden
it's the Christian
olumsuz
Democrats
yaklaşımlar
who
olunca
generally have a more negative outlook to
orada
Turkey's accession.
toparlanıyor.
Schroeder versus Merkel.
Gibi.
Schroeder mesela bu
For
konuda bize
example,
çok ciddi destekler
Mr.
verdi.
Schroeder has supported
Ama
us,
Bayan Merkel nedense
but Mrs.
sürekli
Merkel
olarak engel.
has been
İşte bir
putting up
taraftan mesela
obstacles.
Avrupa Birliği yani müktesebatı
For
içerisinde
example,
imtiyazlı ortaklık diye bir şey yok.
there is no
İmtiyazlı
such thing as a
ortaklığı
privileged
getirdi önümüze
partnership
koydu.
in the
Böyle bir şey yok.
European Union
Yani
acquis,
bugüne kadar
and
hiçbir ülke
she
için
is,
böyle bir
Mrs.
şey
Mrs.
uygulamadı.
Merkel is trying to present
Fakat Bayan Merkel bunu önümüze
privileged
çıkardı.
partnerships, for example.
Kalktı, mesela gayet güzel aramızda görüşmeler oldu. Bunlar hep
And then we've had discussions,
Ve
meetings, talks
Almanya'da
with
3 milyona yakın
these
Türk var.
leaders, and there are 3 million
Zaten
Turks living in
fiili olarak
Germany.
Avrupa
So in
Birliği'ne
fact,
girmiş
we are de facto
ülkeyiz.
a part of Europe,
Vatandaşlarımızdan
because
şu
our
anda
citizens,
700 bin
Turkish people,
civarında
live
Alman vatandaşı olan var.
in Europe.
Bu kadar
700,000
iç içe
Turkish
girmiş
people
olan
are
bir
citizens of
toplumla
Germany.
niçin siz
So
hala
we're all
böyle bir yaklaşım
integrated. So
gösteriyorsunuz dediğimizde
when we ask
onlar
why
işte gerek
Mrs. Merkel
dini,
is showing us
gerek
this kind of
nüfusumuzun
approach,
kalabalıklığını, ki
they
bunların
say
hiçbir tutarlılığı yok.
the
Eğer böyle
religion
olacak
or
olursa, şu
that
anda
Turkey has a
nüfusu
high
kalabalık olan
population.
ülkeler içerisinde şüphesiz
But I think
Almanya'da
this is
var.
not really
Ve
well
tabii
founded, because Germany
bizim
is
bu
also a
noktadaki
highly populated
attığımız
country.
adımlarda,
So
bakıyoruz,
in all the
Fransa
steps
aynı
we
şekilde
take, for example,
karşımıza
France
çıkıyor.
is also
Avusturya
coming up
aynı
with some
şekilde karşımıza çıkıyor.
objections, and
Ve dikkat
Austria
ederseniz
too.
bunların bir ortak paydası
And
var.
they have a
Hepsi
common
Hristiyan
denominator.
Demokrat Parti.
All of those who look
Bunlar
not so
zaten
favorably on Turkey's
Avrupa
accession are
Birliği
Christian Democrats.
Anayasasının yapımında da
And
Avrupa
Christian
Birliği
Democrats
Anayasası'na
have also
Hristiyanlık köküne dayanır
been arguing for
maddesini koymak istedi.
a
Orada da çok
common
ciddi mücadeleler
platform
oldu.
in the European
Bu
Constitution based on
mücadelelerin
Christianity.
sonucunda
There was a
bunun
lot of
oraya
discussion on
konmaması
that too, and it was finally
gerekirdi ve
decided that
konmadı.
Christianity would not be a part
bu
of
neydi?
the European
Eğer
Constitution.
böyle bir şey yapılmış olsaydı,
If, in
o zaman
fact, it had
Avrupa
been the
Birliği
other
bir
way around,
Hristiyan
if
kulübü haline
Christianity
dönüştü.
had been put into the
Şimdi bunu
Constitution,
genelde
European
aramızda
Constitution,
konuştuğumuz
then the
zaman,
EU would
hayır,
have become a
Avrupa Birliği
Christian
bir
club.
Hristiyan kulübü
When we speak
değildir.
to them, they
Bir
tell us
değerler
that the
bütünüdür.
EU is not a Christian
Değerler
club, it's a
birliğidir
union of
diyorlar.
common values. This is what we're
Böyleyse,
told, this is
o
what
zaman
they say.
Türkiye'nin Avrupa Birliği'ne
Well, if this is
katılımı
so,
Avrupa
then
Birliği'ne çok şey
Turkey's
kazandıracak.
accession to the EU is
Nedir
going
o?
to bring a lot
Örneğin,
to the
işte
EU. What
medeniyetler
is that, for example?
ittifakını o zaman Avrupa Birliği
This will be an
içerisinde
example of an
biz
alliance of
oluşturmuş olacağız.
civilizations. We will have
Nedir o?
achieved an alliance of
1,5
civilizations in
milyarlık
the
İslam
EU.
dünyası ile
In other
Avrupa
words, there
Birliği
will be a link
arasında
which will be
gayet
established
güzel
between
bir
the
diyalog
EU
zemini
and the
oluşuyor.
Muslim
Türkiye burada
world,
bir
which makes
köprü
up 1.5
vazifesi
billion
görecek.
people.
But
Turkey
that was my
will
first
serve as a
question. Do you
bridge.
believe
Bu benim
that Turkey
üçüncü-
can play that kind of role?
Yes. Oynar.
Yes, Turkey can play that role.
Ve Türkiye'nin burada elinde önemli enstrümanlar var.
Turkey has important
Bakın,
instruments in
Türkiye'nin
this respect.
17
For
Aralık'ta
example,
müzakere süreciyle ilgili kararı aldığı gün
when
bizim önemli tebrikler
the
aldığımız ülkeler Avrupa
decision
Birliği
for
ülkelerinden
accession
çok
negotiations,
İslam
beginning of
ülkeleri oldu.
accession negotiations was
Nasıl
taken on
sevmişler?
December 17th, it was the
Gördükleri
Islamic
yerde hep
countries
bunu
who
bize ifade
congratulated us.
etmişler.
They've always told us that
Önemliydi.
they were very happy
Niye? Çünkü artık bir
with this decision of the
köprü
EU, and they've said
oluşuyordu
that
ve bu
Turkey
köprü
will
vasıtasıyla
serve
da
as a bridge,
Avrupa Birliği
and
üyesi
as a result
ülkelerle
of this,
İslam ülkeleri arasındaki bağ kuvvetlenecek.
the link between European and
önemli
Islamic
bir
countries
adımdı.
would
Buna da
improve, and
sevinmişlerdi.
this is an
Sevinçlerini de
important
bizimle
step for them,
paylaştılar.
and they share that joy with us.
Some critics of Turkey's admission to the European Union say there's a fundamental difference in the culture. One comes out of an Ottoman tradition, one comes out of a European enlightenment. Two different cultures. You say
Şu anda bunu tabii saygıyla karşılarım.
Yes,
Karşı bir
I
düşünce.
greet this view with respect. This is an opposing view,
Daha bir kenara
but
koyduğumuz koyarsak
let me
bizim
say that
ortak değerlerimiz olduğu gibi farklı
while we have
değerlerimiz var.
values in common, we also have
Eğer
different
Batı
values.
medeniyeti
If
özellikle
the
Doğuyu bir
Western
kenara koyacak
civilization
olursa yalnızlaşır.
leaves the Eastern civilization aside, then the Western civilization will
Örneğini
weaken.
verecek olursak,
To give you an
bizler
example,
Türkler olarak
today we as
Müslümanlar
Turks, as Muslims,
bir Farabileri, İbn Sina'ları
we have the history of Farabi and Ibn Sina or the architect Sinan. We have this in our culture. We have Mevlana, we have Yunus Emre. They are a part of our culture.
Dolayısıyla
All
bunların
of these leading
Batı
people,
kültürünün,
intellectuals,
medeniyetinin oluşmasında etkilerini
they have
görüyoruz.
also had an impact on the
Ve
formation
bunları
of
yok
Western
fark etmek,
civilization.
özellikle medeniyetlere
Disregarding them
saygı,
completely
kültürlere
is
saygıdan
not
böyle
respecting
zannediyorum ki
civilizations and cultures, I
bizim de
think.
Batı'dan aldıklarımız
Of
var.
course, and there
Ama
are things
Batı'nın
we
da
have taken
bizden
from the West,
aldıkları var.
and so has the
Ve
West taken things
zaten
from the East.
medeniyetler
And
bunlarla
this is, in fact, how
medeniyetler
civilizations
arası
are
ittifak
formed.
zaten bununla
This
oluşuyor.
is what Alliance of
Şimdi bizler
Civilizations is all about.
İnşallah başlatacağımız bu çalışmada
Hopefully,
özellikle
with this
İspanya ve
work, we will
Türkiye'nin
start with the Alliance of
eş sponsor olacağı bu
Civilizations,
çalışmada
where Spain and
göreceksiniz
Turkey
bunları
will
çok daha
co-sponsor the
açık net
work.
ortaya koyacağız.
We will
Kim
very
nerede
clearly put these
nasıl
forth.
bazı katkılar ortaya
We
koyuyor,
will show
bunları
how
ortaya
each
koyacağız.
culture has
Ve
contributed to the other one.
mesela bizde özellikle çoklukta birlik, birlikte çokluk
We believe
gibi
in
bir anlayış var ki
diversity and plurality, and I think that what we are trying to do with the Alliance of Civilizations is to invite greater diversity in order to form some unity in this diversity, and that diversity will enrich the unity that we want to establish. And this is something that we have to do. This is all the riches that we have. We should not ignore it, and this is how we view the world. And so there are many things we have taken from the Western civilization in the same way as we have given many things from the Eastern civilization to the West. I don't think there is any question about this. And this was so carefully and successfully done by everybody's ancestors, and it is for that reason, for this alliance of civilizations, that we say yes to the invitation to be a part of Europe.
There are those in your country who say he's making too many concessions. At some point, the demands of the European Union could lead to a perception of humiliation for Turkey.
Bu noktada bizim kendimize güvenimiz var.
We believe in ourselves on this
Ve
point.
girerken bu konuda bütün Avrupa müktesebatının içeriğini bilerek
And when we embarked on this process, we had already examined the acquis communautaire of the European Union, all the legislation of the EU, and Turkey, as you know, became a part of the customs union in 1996.
Üye olan ülkelerin hiçbirisi için geçerli değil.
And this
Ama
was not
Türkiye
true
önce
for
Gümrük Birliği'ne
the new
kabul
members.
edildi.
Turkey
Ve
has
şu
been
anda
accepted
Gümrük
as a member of the
Birliği'nin
customs
üyesi
union. Before
yaklaşık 10
it
yıldır bu
is a
süreci
member,
devam
full
ettiriyor.
member. It is a full member.
Ardından Helsinki
So
zirvesinde
this is a process
Türkiye
that has
yine
been ongoing for
bildiğiniz
10
gibi
years.
aday ülke
Then
olarak
in
kabul
the
edildi.
Helsinki summit, Turkey was
Onun
accepted as a
ardından
candidate country.
2002 Kopenhag
And then in the
zirvesinde
Copenhagen
Türkiye
summit,
bu
EU
defa
summit in 2002,
17 Aralık'a kadar Kopenhag
it was
siyasi
stated
kriterlerini
that
yerine
Turkey
getirmesi
should
halinde
fulfill the Copenhagen political
gecikmeksizin
criteria until
Avrupa
December
Birliği
17th, 2004.
müzakere süreci
And if that
içerisinde
happened, the EU
çalışmalarına
said that
başlardı.
Turkey would begin
Şu anda
accession
biz
talks with the EU
bütün bu
without delay.
siyasi kriterleri
so
tamamladık.
We have
Ve
completed
3 Ekim
all of those
tarihi
political criteria,
17 Aralık'ta
and
verildi.
on
3
December
Ekim'de de
17th, the
müzakerelere
date,
başlamak
October
için
3rd,
de
was
kendi
set for
çalışmalarımızı
the beginning of
yapıyoruz.
accession
Ve
talks,
bu
and
noktada
October
bir
3rd is
defa
approaching, and we have
modernleşme
made our preparations
yolundaki
to start accession
hedeflerimizi
talks.
bu
We're
siyasi
also
kriterleri de
continuing with our reforms and work
çerçevesi
for
içerisinde
modernization within the
sürdüreceğiz,
framework of
devam
these
ettireceğiz.
political
Bunda
criteria
kararlıyız.
set forth by the EU. We're determined in this.
No doubt in your mind that the talks will begin on October 3rd.
Hayır.
Cyprus as a
Kıbrıs.
condition.
Şart olarak Kıbrıs.
Kopenhag siyasi kriterleri içerisinde Kıbrıs şartı yok.
There is no condition of Cyprus within the Copenhagen political
Şu anda
criteria.
önümüzde böyle bir şart
So we
yine
have no such condition before us.
olmayan
But
şartı
the British
bizden-
and the French
Hayır, onlar da kendi aralarında bu meseleyi konuştular.
They've spoken about this
son
amongst themselves,
gelişmelerle
and with the
sanıyorum
most recent
mutabakatı da
developments, I think
sağlamış durumda.
they have reached
Bu
an
konuyla
agreement.
ilgili biz deklarasyonumuzu
We have
yayınladık.
made a
Ek
statement,
protokolü
and we
imzaladık.
signed the
kendilerine de şunu
protocol, the additional
ifade
protocol,
Dedik ki
and we
bizler
said that
özellikle 24 Nisan referandumu ile ilgili biliyorsunuz Annan planının
we
oylanması
did
süreci vardı.
we put our best efforts for the referendum that took place on April 24th last year. As you know, there was a referendum of the Annan Plan, and despite the opposition, we supported this vote for the referendum, and the Turkish Cypriots supported this plan by 65%. But the Greek Cypriots did not support the plan because the Greek Cypriot politicians worked against this plan, and the plan was refused by 75% of the votes. As you know, there is a line between north and south of the island of Cyprus, and the UN is present in that line. And why is there that line? Why is the UN there? And so there is a border problem in this country, and that country has become a part of the EU, a member of the EU. I think this was where the mistake was made, and Turkey will not pay the price for this mistake. As a guarantor country, Turkey has fulfilled its obligations with regard to Northern Cyprus, and from this point on, with regard to any future recognition process, we are ready to work under the UN umbrella. I emphasize the UN umbrella because if we speak of international diplomacy, and if we speak about the general political recognition, I think the right platform for that would be the UN. And we have heard from the European Union countries that they will support us in the future if the Turkish Cypriots voted for the plan, but they didn't do anything they promised.
Before we leave Europe and the idea of Europe, how long will it take for Turkey to become a member of the European Union?
It's hard to say how long it would take at this point because there is no such specific calendar, arithmetically speaking. The only criteria here is to make sure that all the political criteria are in place and all the Maastricht criteria are fulfilled. Once all of these criteria are fulfilled, as you know, there are 35 chapters to the European Union acquis, and once all the chapters are negotiated, then full membership decision will have to be taken. Now, whether that takes 7 years or 10 years, it's hard to say. But I can say that Turkey, with all of its institutions, infrastructure, has made serious preparations for this process. All the non-governmental organizations, civil society, is also participating in this process. Universities are a part of this process. The business community is also a part of this process. And we're also in touch with countries that have had this experience of membership to the EU. We will be in touch with them, and I think that we will move this process forward, and the media will also be a part of this process as well. And I think we can move fast hand in hand.
Is it your most important foreign policy
Bu
objective?
en önemli dış politika hedefiniz diyebilir miyiz?
Yes.
Yes, we can say that. Neden?
Şu anda siyasette iktidarı devralırken halkımıza verilmiş
When
bir sözümüz
we
var.
took power, we had made a promise to the people.
Farklı bir gücü, farklı bir enerjiyi bu alana harcadığımızı göreceksiniz.
We had said to the promise to the people that we would put in extra effort and energy to the EU process because 42 years have gone by in Turkey's relations with the EU, and in the last 3 years we have taken serious steps forward, and we want to achieve a result. And if it's not going to happen, at least we want to know that. If the negotiations will start, and I think they will, then we have to embark on to the next stage and move on with the process of accession so that we can contribute to the European Union as well. And integration between Turkey and the EU, therefore, will be an important project for us. Of course, this is not a new project. This is, in fact, something that began with Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the Turkish Republic. And what we're trying to do is accelerate this process so that we can finish this process, or at least move it forward
Is
quickly.
he your political hero?
Atatürk sizin
Cumhuriyet tarihinin şu anda tabii görünen gerek kurucusu olması
If you look at the
itibariyle
history of the Turkish
gerekse
Republic,
attığı
as the
adımlarıyla
founder of the Republic,
siyasi
as someone who has
kahramanımız
taken important steps, he is a political hero.
And the Republic really is the foundation for a secular Turkey.
Cumhuriyeti zaten yok farz edemezsiniz.
Yes, of course, the republic is there. We cannot
Cumhuriyetin demokrasiyle
disregard it,
adeta
ignore
et
it,
tırnak
because
gibi bölünmez,
the
ayrışmaz yanları var.
republic and the democracy
Cumhuriyet
are
halkın
hand in
ta
hand,
kendisidir.
and the republic is the
Yok,
people
farz
itself,
etmek
and
mümkün
that
değil,
cannot
tabii.
be disregarded. Yes, of course.
Would you accept not full membership, but a privileged partnership?
Şimdi Avrupa müktesebatının, Avrupa Birliği müktesebatının içinde böyle bir
That
tanım
doesn't exist in the EU.
Böyle bir adres
There is no
seçenek
such definition of a privileged
Şimdi
partnership.
olmayan
There
bir
is no
seçeneği
such choice
Bayan
option,
Merkel
if you will.
söyledi diye bizim
Well,
kabul etmemiz
it's
mümkün değil
not
ki.
possible for us to
Böyle
accept
bir
such an
seçenek
option that doesn't
müktesebatın
exist simply
içerisinde
because
olmuş
Mrs. Merkel
olsaydı
said
o
it.
zaman
And
tartışılabilirdi.
if that had
Ama
been one
olmayan
of the
seçenek,
options
maç
in the
başlamış,
acquis,
90
then we could have
dakika
perhaps
artı
spoken about it. But the
uzatmalar,
game has
maçı
already started.
oynuyorsunuz
We've
ve maç
completed most of the
oynanırken
work, and
penaltının
as the
kurallarını
game
değiştiriyorsunuz.
goes on, you
Yok
change
böyle
the
bir şey.
rules. That
So you will
that's
ride
not
or
possible.
fall on full membership?
Üyelik yapın.
Yes.
No privileged partnership
Yani
or any other
imtiyazlı
new
ortaklık
definition?
veya başka
Bunun
bir
dışında bir şey kabul etmek
bilmiyorsunuz.
mümkün değil.
It is impossible for us to accept any such thing.
How good, how bad, what's the state of your relationship with the United States?
Her zaman söylediğimiz gibi biz
As I've
Türkiye,
always
ABD,
said,
her ikimiz
Turkey and the
stratejik
US,
iki
we are
müttefik,
strategic
ortağız.
partners,
Zaman zaman
allies.
bazı yaklaşım
Sometimes
tarzlarında bunlar bulunduğumuz
we may have
coğrafyayla
differences
ilgili,
of opinion
bulunduğumuz
on
konumla
certain issues
ilgili
because of the geography
farklı
we're in or the
düşündüğümüz yerler
topic
olur.
we are
Ama
talking about at that point.
örneğin biz 1970'lerde de böyle bir
For
şey
example, in the
yaşadık.
70s too, we had a difficult time, and then there
farklı bir
was a
anlaşma
defense economic
meydana
cooperation agreement which was
Ve
signed
bununla
in the
birlikte de
aftermath of a
işleyen bir
difficult
süreç başladı.
time. So
Şu anda da biz yine
we go through these processes. Right now, we are going through a similar process with the
özellikle
US,
yazılı ve görsel medyada
especially in the press and the
bunu
media.
yanlış aktarma diyebiliriz, yanlış
There
yönlendirme
are
diyebiliriz.
sometimes misrepresentations of the situation, and it is made to look as though there is a serious problem between Turkey and the US. Unfortunately, there are such reviews or opinions, but I can say that from the moment I became the Prime Minister of the Republic of Turkey, I have had contacts with both the President and the administration, and we've had a very positive relationship at that. And both in our bilateral meetings, in our meetings in international events, or on during our telephone conversations, we continue to enjoy a good relationship, which will continue in the future. And at this point, I would like to say the following to our American friends. The relations between our two countries are based on a very important strategic partnership. The current government in Turkey does not have any other view other than pursuing and maintaining, developing this strategic partnership. I mean this in the military, political, economic sense, in all of these areas, in commerce, in trade, and we will continue with that.
A principal consideration for the United States is what to do in Iraq. What advice do you have for the President?
On this point, I've had some meetings with the President, and I've expressed my views about Iraq. As we speak, even today, we, as the neighboring countries of Iraq, we've been working or holding meetings, and we've had already 8 meetings of foreign ministers of neighboring countries of Iraq, including the foreign minister of Iraq. What we would like to see is an end to the violence in Iraq, and that there be peace and democracy in Iraq. The Iraqi people have understood the importance of democracy. That is why they went to the ballot box to vote. And at the end of 2005 or beginning of 2006, there will be another election in Iraq. And we will see the turnout in that election. Higher turnout will mean that there's greater interest in democracy in Iraq. And so all countries, including Turkey and the neighboring countries, other neighboring countries of Iraq, we must continue to work very hard for higher turnout. And those groups, people, Arabs or Turkomans who do not wish to be a part of this process, they should be convinced to be a part of this process. This is what we must do. We must make sure that they become part of the election so that everybody is represented in the parliament and opinions are voiced in the parliament, because being excluded from parliament isn't going to yield any results. But if different groups are a part of the parliament, Iraqi parliament, then participatory democracy can exist. And I think this is important, and this is what we have to work for. In addition, Turkey is also providing logistical support. Turkey is helping provide logistical support to the American bases in Iraq. We provide food, medicine, water, electricity. Turkish people are working in construction sites, and we are providing a lot of support. In the process, unfortunately, we have more than 100 of our nationals have lost their lives. These are mostly truck drivers who are taking support to and aid to Iraq, and we've lost about 100 Turkish nationals. We do all these in order to help support the future of Iraq.
Your fear is civil war and independent Kurd state with Kirkuk as its center, as its capital. That's what you fear the most, civil war.
Well, first and foremost, the Kirkuk issue is an important issue. There was a mistake that was made in the past about Kirkuk, and I think we should not be making that same mistake again. Now we see one ethnic element trying to dominate this area, but that's wrong. In Kirkuk, the Iraqi people must govern Kirkuk jointly, collectively, because Kirkuk has a special position in Iraq. The ethnic element which wants to dominate Kirkuk has no historical ties to the city, but now they're trying to establish such a tie. I think that the intentions behind this are not so pure, and this is not a very sincere approach. In my opinion, here the United States must also be very sensitive and careful, because this area could create many problems in the future. Our biggest problem in Iraq is the existence of the PKK Congregal terrorist organization in northern Iraq. And on this point, I've mentioned this to both President Bush and also with Secretary of State in the past with Mr. Powell and now with Ms. Rice. We've spoken about this issue, and we've always sought U.S. support. And they have said that they agree with us, that they think that we are right. But so far, a concrete step has not been taken on this point. This is what we are waiting for, the concrete step. Because the PKK terrorist organization is infiltrating through the border from northern Iraq to Turkey, and that's a threat to us.
And you're not satisfied that the United States is as vigilant as it ought to be against the PPK?
What they have told us, the administration has told us, is that they are aware of the importance of this issue and that they will take those steps, and that we should not be worried about this. But what we're saying is that those concrete steps must be taken as soon as possible. Why do we say that? We say that because terrorism requires, fight against terrorism requires international cooperation. For example, when the terrorist attacks took place on September the 11th in New York, we were one of the first ones to say that we as Turkey are ready to be a part of the international platform to fight terrorism. When Afghanistan was discussed, we sent our army to Afghanistan twice. We took over command twice of the International Security Assistance Force there. And right now, our Turkish contractors are working with investments and infrastructure work in Afghanistan. Despite all the difficulties, there are threats, there are difficulties on the ground in Afghanistan, but we're still working in Afghanistan because this is a matter of solidarity, and this same thing should happen in Iraq. So while we show this solidarity, we look for our friends to show the same kind of support to us in our fight against terrorism. And sometimes it is difficult for us to explain this to our public opinion too.
Because it's strongly against the Iraqi war and the American presence in Iraq and even in Afghanistan?
Türk kamuoyu yani Afganistan'a asker
The Turkish public
göndermemiz
opinion
noktasında ciddi bir karşı çıkması olmadı.
did not oppose Turkey sending troops to Afghanistan.
Şeyde tabii Irak'taki
On
olayın
Iraq, of course,
gelişmesi
the
sürecinde
way
çok
events
farklı,
developed, there were
olaylar
many things that
yaşandı.
happened in the
O
process
da
in
özellikle
Turkey. And
şuradan kaynaklanıyordu.
the reason why
Bu Irak'taki
those
cezaevi
kinds of
resimleri
events happened was because those
rahatsız
pictures
edici.
of the prison in
Aynı
Iraq,
şekilde bir
they
taraftan
were very
Guantanamo ile ilgili resimler
difficult to accept for the public opinion. Then the pictures in Guantanamo were also published in the Turkish press. As those pictures were published in the press, the Turkish public opinion felt very uncomfortable, and that was what provoked the Turkish people to think so strongly against the war. Of course, these also had to do with the decision of the 1st of March decision in the Turkish parliament. In fact, the majority of the votes were for the decision on the 1st of March, but there was a technicality, and therefore the vote didn't go through. But for the overflights, we got a positive vote from the Turkish parliament, and overflights were allowed as a result. Then we brought the second parliamentary motion to the Turkish parliament, which was passed with a majority vote. But then it was said that the Iraqis didn't want the Turkish soldiers on the ground, and therefore Turkey did not send troops to.
You know, as I have said to you before, there's some Americans who think that if the vote of the parliament had not gone against allowing American troops to come through Turkey, the war might have gone better after the toppling of Saddam. The decision of the Turkish parliament made a difference as to the results in Iraq.
Şimdi tabii bu geçmiş bir süreç.
Well, of course,
Yani
this
bunun
was
artısı var, eksisi var.
in the past,
Doğru
and
olabilir de yanlış
this may have
olabilir
been
de.
true, but
Yani
then
bunu
again, it may
şimdi
not have been
konuşmak
true.
bana göre
I think
yersiz.
it's very hypothetical to talk about this
Acaba
now.
olsaydı, tam aksi
What would have
olsaydı,
happened
bir
if?
defa da şu
Well,
söylenebilirdi.
then,
Girmeseydi,
what if
o zaman çok daha isabetli olabilirdi diyenler çıkabilirdi.
the US had never
Böyle olunca tabii
gone
bu tür
into Iraq? Then you
yaklaşım
can go into
gösterenler
that
olur.
discussion.
Was it a mistake?
Ben onu konuşmuyorum. Yani şu anda bu süreçte
This is not what I mean. I'm just saying that
Amerika oraya girdiği zaman
when the
Amerikan
US
halkının
first
yaklaşımı
went into Iraq,
olumluydu.
the
Ama
American
haftalar,
people were
aylar
supporting
geçtikçe
this,
Irak halkının
and then as the
yaklaşımı
weeks and months
olumsuz
went
olmaya
by,
başladı.
the Iraqi people too started having second
Yani
thoughts.
burası çok önemli.
And I think this was important
Şimdi
too. The
ilk
public opinion in
girdiğinde
Iraq is also important.
coşkuyla
When
karşılanan
the
bir
American
Amerika,
troops
ama daha
went
sonra
in, the
maalesef
Iraqi
halkın
people
bile
welcomed
karşı çıktığı
them,
bir yapı oluşmaya başladı.
and then
Bunun
over time
psikolojik ve
that support
sosyolojik
was lost.
incelemesini çok
And
iyi
I think
yapmak
the
gerekiyor.
psychological and the
Eğer bu
sociological
yapılırsa,
evaluation
öyle
of this must be
zannediyorum ki,
carefully done.
Acaba nerede
And
ne
if
gibi
that is
yanlışlar
done,
yapıldı?
then
Bakın şu anda bile,
perhaps mistakes can be understood.
Amerika'da çok
For
üst
example,
noktada makamlara gelmiş olanların yaptığı açıklamalar var.
there are statements
Bunlar da,
by the senior
herkes
ranking
tarafından tabii
American
takip
officials,
ediliyor,
and we
inceleniyor.
follow, and everybody
Bu
follows
konuyla
those
ilgili de
announcements and
bence
statements.
değerlendirmeleri iyi
And I
yapmak
think
lazım.
that one has to
Örneğin,
evaluate
mesela
this
kitle
very
imha
carefully.
silahları
For
dendi.
example, the weapons of
Ama
mass
kitle imha
destruction.
silahları
There
ortaya
were
çıkmadı.
suggestions
Kitle imha
that there
silahları tabii
were
ortaya
weapons of
çıkma
mass
işi
destruction in
bir
Iraq,
defa
but they were never
dünyanın
found
bakışını
in
da
Iraq.
değiştirdi.
And that, of
Ama
course,
çıkmış olsaydı
changed
belki
public
o zaman
opinion around the world.
değiştirmeyecekti.
If weapons of
bunları
mass
bilemezdik.
destruction had been found, perhaps things wouldn't have been the way they are.
But they weren't.
Ama bulunamadı kitle imha silahları dediğiniz gibi.
Bulunamadı.
No, they weren't.
Is this war going from bad to worse? Is it getting worse? Is the insurgency getting stronger? Is the outlook bad?
Tabii şu anda bir taraftan demokrasiye geçiş mücadelesi
On the
var.
one hand, of course, there's a struggle to move into
Ama bir
greater
taraftan da
democracy
tabii
in Iraq.
bu noktada
On the other hand,
koalisyon güçleri içerisinde yer alanların bakışı
those in the coalition forces
koalisyon
have
güçleri
their
buna nasıl
points of
bakıyor?
view. How does the coalition forces view
Biz artık
developments in
buraya
Iraq?
girdik, netice almadan çıkamayız
Now
diyenler
that
olduğu gibi
they're in
artık
Iraq, some
çıkmamız
say that
gerekiyor
they should
diyenler de
stay
var.
there. There are others who
Tabii
support
şahsen
withdrawal
benim
from
bir
Iraq.
komşu ülkenin
Now,
lideri
as a
olarak yaklaşımım
leader
var.
of a neighboring country,
Yani biz şu
my
anda
view is that
Irak'taki güvenlik güçlerinin gerek asker olarak gerek
the
polis olarak
security forces in Iraq,
iyice
both the
yetiştirilmeden
military and the police,
duruma
have to be trained
onlar hakim olmadan
until
oradan
they
koalisyon
can control
güçlerinin
the
çıkması
situation.
bir yanlış.
And the coalition forces, in our view,
Başta
should
Amerika
not
olmak
leave
üzere.
until then. And this
Ama
includes, of
orada
course, the US troops
Irak'ın
and all the
kendi
other coalition
askeri,
forces.
kendi
In the
polisi
meantime, however, the
durumu
Iraqi
yönetecek duruma
forces themselves,
geldiği
the
anda
police, must
o
be
zaman
trained so that
çekilmesi
they are in a
faydalı
position
olabilir.
to
Ama şu
manage
anda
the situation. At the moment, I think it would be premature.
Premature for the U.S. to leave.
evet.
Yes.
Is the situation so bad while the Iraqi troops are developing, Iraqi security forces, that there is a need for Turkish troops and other moderate or other states in the region to contribute troops under UN command to help?
Şu anda tabii bu biraz geç kalın.
I think it's rather
Şahsen,
late for that.
Bu Afganistan'daki
My
gibi
personal opinion
bir
is that
NATO gücü olarak oraya girilmiş olsaydı,
if this had been a
Birleşmiş
NATO force,
Milletler
like is the
yönetiminde
case in
olmuş
Afghanistan,
olsaydı
or if
çok
this
daha
had been
sağlıklı
under
olabilirdi.
UN command, things would have been
Çok
much
daha
better,
sağlıklı olabilirdi.
in my view.
Yani
But this should
Afganistan'ın
have
bir
been done
avantajı da buradan geliyor.
at the beginning, and this is in fact where Afghanistan
NATO
is at
olarak
at an
orada
advantage,
tabii
if you will, as
orada bir
compared to
rahatlık
Iraq,
var.
because there's a
noktada bir
NATO
sıkıntı.
mandate in
Ama
Afghanistan.
Irak'ta tabii olay böyle
But in
bakılmıyor.
Iraq, of course, this is not how
Burada
things were
direkt
viewed.
olarak
Here,
NATO değil,
it is
Amerika
not NATO, but
ve
it's the
Amerika'nın davet
US
çıkardığı diğer
and
koalisyon
other
güçleri olması
coalition
sebebiyle
forces
burada
that
bir
the US has
sıkıntı
invited,
söz
and that is
konusu.
why, in fact, there is
Eğer NATO olarak
a problem.
buraya girilirse,
If it had been
Birleşmiş
NATO,
Milletler burada
or if it had been
olayı
the
organize
UN
edip, koordine edip
who
götürmüş olsaydı,
organized
böyle
everything in
zannediyorum
Iraq,
ki,
then I think
çok az sıkıntıyla bu iş aşılabilir.
there would have been much less problems.
Okay. Just to be clear, you do not want to see the United States leave Iraq until the Iraqi security forces can handle the insurgents.
Hiç konuda.
That is correct.
Bu konuda biz de yardıma hazırız.
And we are ready to help
Eğitim
with
noktasında
regard to training of the
yakın bir
security forces and
sınır
police,
komşusu olarak
etc.
gerek
Because
polisini,
we are
gerek
a
askerini
neighbor
Irak'ın
and we can
eğitmede
train
hazır
the
olduğumuzu
police
kendilerine
and the military, the Iraqi police and the military.
Is civil war more likely today than it was 6 months ago?
Tabii şu anda demokrasiye geçişle iç içe olan bir durum söz konusu.
What we are seeing in Iraq today is a process of moving into democracy. I don't expect such a development before the elections, civil war before the elections, and I hope that after the elections we will not have civil war.
Are you satisfied with the Constitution as proposed?
Şu anda tabii anayasadan özellikle Araplar ve Türkmenler
The
rahatsız.
Arabs and the Turkomans are not happy with the constitution
Çünkü gerek Arapları gerekse
because
Türkmenleri dışlayan bir
it
anayasa.
excludes the Arabs and the Turkomans, the constitution.
Bizim sürekli olarak tavsiyemiz şu olmuş.
Our suggestion has
Irak'ın
always
toprak
been
bütünlüğü.
that it's important to
Irak'ta
protect the
etnik
territorial
unsurların
integrity of
birbirine
Iraq.
egemen
It's important to
olmadığı,
ensure that no
mezheplerin
ethnic
birbirine
element
egemen
dominates other
olmadığı
ethnic elements.
ve
No sect
Irak'ın yeraltı,
dominates
yerüstü
over other
zenginliklerin
sects.
tüm Irak
And we also
halkına
say that
ait
all the
olduğunun
riches,
anayasa
natural resources of
teminatı
Iraq,
altına
above and underground,
alındığı
must
bir
be protected by a
hukuk
constitutional
oluşmalı, bir
guarantee
yasa çıkarılmalı.
for all of the Iraqi
Bizim
people. This is
anlayışımız
how
değil.
the constitution has
Fakat
to be
görünen
had
o
to be
ki
formed.
buna pek
But
sıcak
from what we
bakılmıyor.
can see, this was not
Bu tabii
the
şu
view
anda
that was
sıkıntı
adopted in the
konusudur.
drafting of the constitution. And I
Geleceğe
think that
yönelik
this is a
olarak
cause
en önemli
for
sıkıntıların
concern for the
başında
future.
bana göre bu gelmiyor.
And this will probably be the primary cause for concern for the future.
What will,
Dışlayan değil, kucaklayan bir
So
anayasa.
the constitution
Bu olmalı.
should not have been an excluding one, but an embracing one that included everybody.
how fearful are you that Iran will get nuclear weapons?
Hani bu konuyla alakalı olarak tabii dışarıdan
On this
bakış,
point,
bu bir içten bakış.
there are two different perspectives, one from the
Dışarıdan
outside,
tabii
one
komşu
from the
ülke olarak
inside. Now,
Yani bunun
we are a neighboring
insani
country.
olmayan bir amaçla kullanılmasını
Of course, we do
hiçbir
not
zaman
want to see
tasvip edemeyiz. Ona
nuclear
sıcak
power
bakamayız.
used for
Ama
non-humanitarian
insani amaçlı olarak
reasons.
kullanılması noktasında
If
da
it is going to
kimse
be used for
olmadığı gibi bir şey
humanitarian
diyemez.
reasons, of course,
Özellikle de atom
nobody
enerjisi
can say anything to
kurumuyla
that. And in
ilişki
that
halinde
respect,
bu
it's
süreci
important to be in
işletmekte
touch, in our
çok
view,
büyük
with
fayda var
the
diye
International
düşünüyorum.
Atomic Energy Agency.
Kaldı ki
Cooperation must
dünyada
be
artık
carried forward with the IEA. And today in the world, if you want to compete in industry, energy costs have become very important. And in countries where there is an energy bottleneck, there is a general trend towards nuclear energy. For example, we as Turkey are one of those countries, and we are aiming to take steps forward towards producing nuclear energy. And we're talking to the States, to Canada, to France, England, the UK. We're in touch with their energy companies, because if I cannot provide lower energy costs to the Turkish industrialist, then they cannot compete in the international arena, and I have to therefore provide cheap sources of energy. And there are also environmental concerns that we have to take into consideration. What is important is why this energy is being or this activity is done. If it's done for humanitarian reasons, this is fine. If it's not done for humanitarian reasons but for other reasons, of course this will be an issue we would look at. And in all of our discussions with the Iranians, we've always been stressing the importance of working with the International Atomic Energy Agency and working for humanitarian reasons. And we will continue to make those recommendations. And they tell us that they wish to work in this way. Of course, there are all sorts of other things which are being said and written about. For example, with regard to the European Union countries, according to the information that I have, there is still some communication between the EU countries and Iran on this point.
Most people are pessimistic.
Tabii bu konuda şu anda nükleer enerjinin kullanıldığı birçok Avrupa Birliği üyesi.
Well, there are many EU member countries where nuclear energy is being utilized, and we have to then discuss them. There are also other countries in the Middle East who use nuclear energies, and in the Far East as well. I think we have to look at all of these countries. It's not just Iran, in my opinion, then. We cannot focus simply and solely on Iran. I think that would be unfair. I think that the International Atomic Energy Agency and the UN, we must work collectively and adopt a collective approach that covers all countries. And whether or not different ways of convincing the countries in question should be taken is something that we would have to discuss. And I think that's the way to move forward. And we have to aim for use of nuclear energy in humanitarian causes.
As I get near my last 2 or 3 minutes here, you're an interesting man for a number of reasons. As I said, conservative Democrat, devout Muslim, a good friend of the Prime Minister of Greece, a country that Turkey's been in conflict with, a good friend. You share the same economic views. You send your children to school in the United States. Do you send them here because you want them to have an experience where, in a university where there are no certain restrictions? What's the attraction of a university education in America?
I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. I have 4 children. And of course, any father would want his children to learn about, get the best education she can get. My daughters cover their heads, so they cannot be educated in Turkey. This is a reason why I sent them here to the US. For my 2 boys, they are graduates of a religious school in Turkey, and according to the Turkish educational system, the graduates of those schools have a lower score in entering university, and therefore they have less of a chance in entering the kind of departments they'd like to enter, because their scores are cut down because they're a graduate of a specific kind of high school. So we as a family decided to send our children to the US, and they've all studied here. 3 of my children actually are still studying. The oldest one, he studied here, he completed his master's degree in Harvard, and his wife is also studying here now. She's in university. My older daughter is in Berkeley, is about to complete her graduate studies, and she's married and she's also living here. My younger daughter is now a senior and she will complete her studies, but then they'll all come back to Turkey and they will work in Turkey as educated individuals, and they will work based on the information, the knowledge that they have acquired here in the United States, and they will serve their country.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. It's a pleasure to have you on the program. Good to have you.